So if you've ever hunted in the state of Maine, or you're a Maine resident and you hunt here every year, then you know that hunting for a mature buck in this state can be tough at times. And it really just boils down to where you're hunting. Now there's certain forests, there's certain areas in the state of Maine that you can go to and hunt and harvest, you know, a buck no younger than 2.5 years old that's got 8 or more points. And really, so it just boils down to where you're hunting, whether or not you know the area very well. You've been hunting there for many years. You got the deer's travel patterns pretty much down packed, and you just know your deer. And the deer population makes a huge difference too. You know that just in some places in Maine, the buck to doe ratio is almost even, and in some places you can have more bucks than does, or in other cases more does than bucks. It's wish-washy in the state of Maine. You just never know. So it just boils down to where you live in the state or where you go to hunt in the state, and whether or not you know that area very well. You know where the deer are, know the deer's habits in that area. You know, and in some cases, guys can hunt in the state of Maine and harvest a mature buck every year just because they hunt in a superb place, a superb area where there's lots of bucks. And a lot of the bucks are 2.5 years old or older with nice racks, good genetics, great feed. There could be food plots, maybe their own food plot. So it boils down to several different things that pretty much dictates your success rate in the state of Maine. And I just hope that everything I share with you, you know, is very informative. And my biggest hope is that you'll learn a thing or two, learn a few tips along the way while watching this video to help you become more successful with your bow, so you can go on to harvest more bucks with your bow and archery season. So that's my biggest hope. Number one for you guys while you're watching this video, hopefully I have some other good tips for you. And the tip is, set your hunting stands and your hunting blinds up in areas where you know darn sure deer never travel. And that way your stands and blinds will be hidden that much more, and there's less chance of the deer figuring you out and knowing where that blind is, knowing where that stand is. Less chance you'll be busted at the moment of truth when that buck comes in. So yeah, keep that in mind. Just really know your hunting area very well enough to set those hunting stands and those hunting blinds up in a location where deer will never find them. It's hard to do, extremely hard. Not everyone can do that, but just do your thorough scouting and just learn the deer's travel routes and travel patterns the best you possibly can, and just know your hunting area really well. So your hideouts, your hideaways, where you're ambushing that trophy buck that you're hoping to shoot, it keeps you well hidden so that deer won't bust you. So that's tip number one. All right, let's go on. Yeah, so if you love fishing and hunting, you know, anything to do with whitetail deer, and black bear, and turkey, and you love ice fishing and fly fishing and exploring and just product reviews on fishing gear and hunting gear, yeah, click subscribe, because this channel is for you. Spikes and Gills. Subscribe, lower right hand side. Click that notification bell so you'll be notified of all future uploads by Spikes and Gills. Greatly appreciate it, guys. Thank you very much. Hey, smash that like button for me, could you? I learned everything I possibly could about my hunting area, and I learned everything I possibly could about all the resident deer in my hunting area. And that's got to be your goal. If you want to be successful year in and year out and fill in those deer tags every year, then that's really what it takes. It takes being super addicted to the hunt. The hunt never ends. Just because the hunting season is over doesn't mean your hunting season is over. The hunt never ends. Remember that. The hunt never ends for those of us that are super addicted to deer hunting and never want it to end. It doesn't have to end. There's always year-round scouting, year-round studying up on your area, learning your hunting area, learning your deer, and watching, observing your deer through cellular trail cameras or trail cameras in general. I don't know if you feel this way like I do too, but it feels like Christmas to me when like pulling SD cards from trail cameras and getting the new pictures of the big bucks that in my area, or getting those videos or pictures from my cellular trail cameras on my phone. And I just get super excited. It's like opening presents from under the Christmas tree. It's like Christmas morning. It's like Christmas morning every day for me when I get new videos and pictures from my cellular trail cameras on my phone. Yeah, I'm sure you feel that way too. It's super exciting and thrilling to know what's out there for bucks and getting those big buck pictures. It just gets your blood flowing, gets you anticipating for that future hunt. And so see, the hunt never ends. It can be year round, really, just because you're constantly studying pictures, getting more trail cam pictures, and studying your deer in your area, and scouting your area, and learning the nooks and crannies of your area, and just figuring out all those deer traveling areas, and really what it takes to also, another tip for you, to be successful year in and year out and filling those deer tags, is really knowing the reasons why deer travel where they do. You know, you really got to study the area real thoroughly and figure out why the deer went from point A to point B and on to point C. You know, really learn, get a handle on as to why the deer went from one place to another, why they're going. You know, it could be for cover, bedding cover, go lay down and chew their cud. It could be because they're going to a food source. Maybe the food source they were eating the month prior dried up, died away, and they're going on to the next food source. They could be going from, you know, grasses and clovers onto apples and acorns because those fruits from those fruiting trees are on now. Like in September and October, those acorns could be dropping. They might be honing in on those acorns or those beech nuts or those apples in September and early October. So you just got to keep that in mind. You know, the food sources change season to month to month. You know, every couple months the food source is going to change for white-tailed deer. You got to keep that in mind. Just an area could dry up for you altogether. Where you've been seeing that buck all summer long in early September, all of a sudden the buck could just up and disappear, and he will for the most part. And a lot of times it's just because the food source is changing for that buck. What he was feeding on in August and September is not going to be what he's going to be feeding on in October and November. Food sources change, you know, with the seasons, as the season change, as the year changes and the climate changes and all that. So keep that in mind. So your deer's travel patterns could change month to month based on food source, based on the time of year, whether it's mating time, whether it's pre-rut, peak rut, post-rut. All these things, you got to take all these things into consideration, into account, as to why deer are traveling where they are, why their patterns are all of a sudden changing, and why bucks disappear from one area, but it's all of a sudden showing up and traveling in another. And by having 20, 30 or more trail cameras out there spread out all over your property where you're hunting, you're going to learn where that buck, you know, frequents month to month, where he's traveling. All of a sudden you'll see him completely avoid one area, but he's focusing more on another. So you've got to have those plenty of hunting blinds and tree stands. You've got to set up multiple stands and blinds and trail cameras all over your property where you're hunting, so you can keep up on the whereabouts of those bucks. So that way you can just be that much more prepared, and that way you can go on to harvest one of those trophy bucks that you're after. So that's what it takes, man. I actually am hunting right smack dab right in the middle of deer bedding area. And that's why I get a lot of activity, have a lot of hunting action late morning, midday, and early afternoon. I rarely, if ever, have deer come by my blind or stand or wherever I'm hunting early morning. It's always later morning, like from like 10 o'clock on to 1 to 2. You know, I'll leave for lunch by midday, and I'll try to get right back in there no later than 2, because the deer will be up and moving and coming in to feed in the food plot by like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, like that early, before moving on to head for apples or acorns to other areas where they like to go feed throughout the night and hang out in the night. So yeah, I have like a great spot here to hunt. I can have really good hunting action midday. You know, and actually, believe it or not, a lot of days I sleep in. There's many times where I didn't even bother going in to hunt till 8 o'clock. I'd park my truck get all dressed in my hunting gear, grab my bow and backpack camera equipment, and I'd be heading in at 8:30 in the morning to my blind. And then I wouldn't even see the first deer until like after 10 o'clock. It'd be like a doe and her yearlings, or does a fawn, a young buck, spike buck, button buck, whatever, would come in to feed the food plot, and then they'd go on to bed down, head to their bedding area, where they'd lay up for a few hours, chew their cud, and then on comes more deer, filtering into the food plot before going to bed down. You know, that's just how this area plays out for me where I hunt. And not everyone gets to have that kind of hunting action. You know, for a lot of folks, maybe it's true for you, all your hunting action is going to be in the first 2 hours of daylight and the last 2 hours of daylight, and not late morning, midday, early afternoon. It just boils down to where you hunt, the area that you're hunting. The bedding cover, or just the areas that the deer frequently hang out in midday, just might be in, you know, quite a ways away. It could be several hundred yards off. And it might take the deer a couple hours to graze their way, meander their way on to your hunting stand or blind. And so, and really, in all reality, why hunters aren't seeing deer till the last hour, last half hour of the daylight, is because they're set up far from the bedding area, the bedding cover, that are far from the parts of the forest that the deer hang out in during the day. And I don't know if you know this or not, you might not believe it, but just do your research. And you know, there's several other YouTube channels you can go to, check out, follow, and a bunch of literature you can read up on this, study this, learn all this yourself. But believe it or not, white-tailed deer don't all bed down at specific times, late morning or midday and on till they don't stay laying down for 3, 4, 5 hours at a time. There's exceptions to the rule. I've seen does go into the bedding area, bed down. I've sat on a stump before in bow season and watched this doe chewing her cud for 3 hours. I was getting sunburn on my face and neck, and that doe stayed laying down for 3 hours before ever getting up at like 3 in the afternoon to go on to graze, to feed more. But she stayed there for three hours, and no more, no less. She actually went and bedded down around noon, high noon, was up by 3, moving around, feeding. So, now not all deer do it that way. Some deer actually won't even bed down at all. They might lay down in spurts. You know, this 4-point buck that I go on to harvest, actually, I've seen him do this several different times. There's times where I've seen him feeding in the food plot at like 10 in the morning, say, and then he'd go on to bed down. He'd disappear and be gone because he'd be laying down. And then by like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, he was back out feeding in the food plot again. And then I'd be coming up the dirt road in my pickup truck, and I'd see him bedded off in the ridge chewing his cud shortly after having just fed in the food plot. And then it would be like 3 in the afternoon, 3:30, he'd be back up again, back out feeding. So he fed, bedded down for a couple hours, chewing his cud, resting, got up, fed again, went bedded down again to chew his cud and rest up. And a couple hours later was up again. And maybe at that time he stayed up on his feet, doing whatever he was doing the rest of the evening on into the night. But yeah, so the deer, white-tailed deer, don't have set times in the day when they bed down, and they don't have a certain amount of time that they're gonna stay laying down chewing their cud. It could be just an hour at a time, 2 hours at a time, 3 hours at a time, and in some cases 4 or 5. It really just depends on the weather, depends on the winds, whether it's raining or not raining, how the temperatures. There's a lot of factors that go into play as to why a deer will go to bed down and how long they'll bed, and the reasons why they'll bed where they're bedding. And there's all sorts of factors that go into play as to why deer will bed where they bed and how long they'll stay bedded down, and why they won't bed at all in some cases, or not much at all in the day. You know, and there's some days that white-tailed deer seem to always be out and about, milling around, grazing and on their feet. And I'm sure you've seen that yourself and been like, man, there's a lot of deer around, a lot of deer activity. And have you ever wondered why? It could be that it's a full moon. I don't know if you know this or not, but if you follow Charles J. Alsheimer, you've read all the books by Charles J. Alsheimer and his biology buddies and friends and stuff. He did like a 20-year study and research and study. Alsheimer 20-year long like study with his biology buddies and stuff was on the correlation of the moon phases with the rut, with the phases of the rut, the post-rut, the pre-rut, peak rut, post-rut, and all that stuff. And so, and in their study, in this 20-year-long study that Charles J. Alsheimer did, he learned that there was a lot of noontime, midday, a lot of daytime movement by deer on full moon days. So keep that in mind. When the moon's full, just you want to stay in stand and stay in your hunting blind all day. There's going to be a surge of daytime activity and midday activity by deer in your hunting area on a full moon day. So don't take my word for it. Go look it up yourself and search for yourself to learn all this about moon phases, the correlation of moon phases with the deer activity and the rut activity and all that. So go check it out. Believe it or not, deer calling can't hurt your hunt unless you're just completely screwing it up. Unless you're blowing the call obscenely loud and you're using a call that might not quite go hand in hand with the time of year. I mean, there's certain times of the year that grunts work real good and bleats work good. But for the most part, in October through November, doe bleating, doe attention grunts, buck attention grunts, buck tendon grunts, buck grunting, doe bleating, doe grunts, all those calls work great all through October, November. And that you can't hurt your hunt in using it. If nothing else, it's just going to put the deer at ease that are near you and around you. If they hear anything from you, any noise you make, or maybe they'll like catch your scent and be a little uneasy. The deer could be a little uptight, uneasy, just kind of sensing that you're there. But deer calling can put the deer at ease, make them feel more comfortable knowing that there's deer over there, like where they're smelling your scent from. And all of a sudden they're hearing a deer call, a deer grunt or deer bleat over that way where they're smelling the human odor from. They're gonna relax a little bit more, that much more. They'll probably ignore your scent altogether, really. So having good scent control and having a deer call periodically, using deer calls, all of that goes hand in hand and like covering up your disturbance. And putting those deer at ease in hopes that the deer will come by your hunting area.